A Musical Life with composer, conductor, arranger, and producer Stephen Hackman. Stephen Hackman is one of the most exciting hybrid classical and pop artists on the scene today. Steve has worked extensively with the hit classical crossover group Time for Three, writing several of their unique arrangements, and is currently the creative director of Fuse at the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, music director of the Mashup series at the Colorado Music Festival, and founder and creative director of his own music brand, Stereo HIDEOUT. Welcome to A Musical Life. I'm Hugh Sung. I first met Steve as a young conducting student at the esteemed Curtis Institute of Music, studying under the legendary maestro Otto Werner-Mueller. But while he was pursuing serious classical music studies, he had a secret passion. One day, I happened to be walking by some of the basement practice rooms and heard the most amazing pop piano and vocals coming out from one of them. You guessed it, it was Steve, who has an amazing voice and is an incredible pop songwriter in his own right. As a conductor, Steve went on to work with the Reading Symphony and the Indianapolis Symphony. As a pop songwriter and arranger, he continues to collaborate with Time for Three, has a second album of his own original hip-hop music in the works, and even had a run on Season 7 of American Idol, placing in the top 64 out of 150,000 contestants. But what really got my attention was the amazing symphonic mashups he's been creating, blending pop and classical mediums in a way that's exciting new audiences everywhere. Let's start off by listening to his mashup Bartók vs. Björk, which blends the music of Icelandic pop superstar Björk with Bela Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra.
If you ever get close to a human, if you ever get close to a human, stay
Steve, oh my goodness, it's been such a long time. Welcome to the show.
So great to be here. It has been a long time. Thanks a lot, Hugh.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest thrills has been reconnecting with you after knowing you as a student at Curtis and then seeing all the amazing things you've been doing in the intervening time. It's just a thrill. I saw your post about Bartók versus Bjork on Facebook. I checked it out and I was so blown away. I started digging deeper into some of the other things you're doing. And I thought, wow, we've got to have Steve on the show.
Yeah, I'm so glad, you sort of found it and appreciated it in some way. And I mean, likewise, it's been amazing to watch all the fantastic things you've been doing since I left school. You were embarking on some journeys, I think, right when I was leaving.
I think we both are. And I'd love to spend some time talking about our respective journeys because yours is truly unique and groundbreaking. And I think we can take for granted almost after the fact. It almost seems to come together. But I remember you as a student. You were a conducting student working with the famed conducting maestro Otto Werner-Mueller. And let me confess something. You were such an amazing pop pianist and pop singer, and you were just so immersed in the pop world. I couldn't help thinking, what in the world are you doing here at Curtis? So I guess I want to start the interview with what brought you to Curtis, given your phenomenal pop chops, as it were?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you. I was trying to hide those things as much as possible. So when I was at Curtis, so obviously I didn't fully succeed.
Well, I think that's what I find so fascinating in terms of, for a young person coming to an established classical conservatory like Curtis, and it's about as straight-laced as straight-laced can be, and the struggle you must have been going through because you had such tremendous talent on that end, and yet you were trying to hide it while you were there. What brought you to Curtis in the first place?
Yes, I mean, as far as my upbringing goes, I don't come from a musical family, so to be quite honest with you, I didn't even know what Curtis was until I was looking at applying at the Juilliard School, and I found that Otto Werner-Mueller taught at both schools. So I thought, I might as well, apply for both. So that kind of just shows I really kind of didn't come up in this classical world, and I certainly wasn't bred for a straight, as you called it, a straight-laced, classical career. I think when I was in my undergraduate, I went to school for music education first to be a choir teacher because I had such an amazing choir experience in high school, and I really had a mentor in my high school choir director. Ended up at University of Illinois, where I was singing in this a cappella group, and I was leading the group and producing our albums and arranging the music, and that was sort of my first amazing kind of conducting experience since I was leading that ensemble. And, in tandem with that, I had an unbelievable piano teacher when I was at University of Illinois who was quite above his pay grade, you would say. I mean, he's no longer there. It was complete luck that I found this gentleman, Gustavo Romero. And he opened my world up to classical music, having only studied with sort of the neighborhood piano teacher in my hometown of Cary, Illinois. I had never heard this kind of music. I had never seen that kind of virtuosity, and just fell, head over heels for classical music and just wanted to do it at the highest level possible. And I wanted to, experience and, interface with the best music ever. So, it became clear when I was around, I guess, 19, 20 years old or maybe a little earlier than that conducting would be the way to do it. So I didn't see myself having a career as a classical pianist. It was way too late for that.
So, Steve, I'm wondering, given your interesting non-classical background, I'm wondering if you could describe what your actual years at Curtis were like. Curtis is a tiny, tiny conservatory and extraordinarily difficult to get into. And the fact that you got in as a conducting major is an incredible accomplishment in and of itself. Now, once you got into Curtis, which only has about 150 students or so, tremendous pressure and tremendous tradition that doesn't really encourage, if I may say so, out-of-the-box thinking. What was it like while you were studying there?
Yeah, it really kind of feels like that movie, where the kind of the small town kid goes to the big city. And I'm sure that's like that for anyone that has gone to Curtis, because once you get there, I mean, it's so intense. It's such a special place. So you're overwhelmed with feelings of what life was like before and what life is like now and what you envision your life to be. I do think my case was sort of unique in a way that this classical world, like I said, I had not come up in it. So in ways I was trying to first of all, I was trying to kind of tuck away my pop side. I was kind of trying to hide who I was and kind of trying to redefine myself as, this kind of straight-laced classical person, as somebody, as, a next great American maestro. And I have to say that worked for about 2 months. And my life at Curtis changed, just like my life had changed at University of Illinois because of my piano teacher. Because Ford Lauerstedt, Dr. Lauerstedt, he taught a seminar for conductors and composers. And it was his first year back teaching when I was a first year student. And I was lucky because it was a class before Christmas, before the holiday break, probably right around this time. And no one else showed up for class that day. And he sort of asked me in that class the exact same question, Hugh, you just asked. He said, "What are you doing here?" You tell me you arranged for this pop group. You're a singer, you're a pianist, you're a songwriter. Like, what do you want to do, and why would you have come here? And I sort of said, well, I want to be a great conductor. I love this music, but I took the time, or he encouraged me to share with him my music during that class. So I actually ran home to my apartment in Philadelphia. I grabbed a bunch of CDs, things I had arranged, things I'd written, etc., and ran back. And of course, I was close to Curtis, so I was back quickly and played things for him. And he just kind of got me in that moment. And he said, "Steve, whatever you do, you cannot stop doing this. You have to continue exploring your creative voice, because if you don't, then what's going to happen to you here is you're going to lose it. And that would be the worst thing you could possibly do." So I was able to sort of have, again, 2 parallel tracks at Curtis. I had the conducting with Mr. Mueller, and that was a ride unto itself. That was wonderful at times and brutal at times. But in tandem, the entire time, I had Dr. Lauerstedt not only encouraging my creativity, my songwriting, my arranging, but intense one-on-one lessons in counterpoint improvisation and composition. He actually told the dean, take Steve out of all of his musical studies. I'm doing everything with him.
Wow.
And it was all individual.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So he really took you under his wing.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the most important musical figure in my life, and still a tremendous friend and mentor to this day. So
let's skip ahead. You're graduating the Curtis Institute of Music. And for the typical classical conducting major, the next steps are to look for an orchestra to work at. The next steps are to try to find a group, an ensemble that you can conduct. And is that when you went right to the Reading Symphony, or what were your next steps after finishing your intense studies at Curtis?
Right. So this is pretty important. Okay. Firstly, I probably could have stayed at Curtis, to be honest, for a couple more years because I was so young. But I thought I was a hot shot, and I thought I was ready to take over the world, like everyone does when they're 20, 24, 23, 24. And I was admitted into the Aspen program for conducting that summer right after I graduated, which was a very big deal, and really had kind of emerged as a launch pad for conductors. So I attended that and did quite well there. But that first year out of school was was tough because I had gone to Aspen and I figured, okay, the job offers should start coming in, so to speak. And they didn't come as quickly as I had hoped. And I think about this a lot because by this time I have really kind of developed the attitude that rejection is a gift. And it is, first of all, you're learning, okay, that something's not right for me for some reason. And second of all, you're being given time. You know, whatever the thing you were rejected from was going to take your time. So you've given all that time back to redevelop, to work, to continue to evolve. So in that time, I was aching to become a conductor, actually, and it wasn't happening. And in those, I bet it was like 6 or 7 months where nothing was happening. And then a lot started happening. But in that time, I really took a look at life and what life would be like if the conducting thing happened to let's say my wildest dreams were achieved as a conductor. I really took a look at what that life would be. And that was when I decided it just wasn't for me. So then all of a sudden, of course, I make this decision. I tell my parents, they freak out. And then the calls start coming in as a conductor.
What was it about the conducting life that you foresaw that did not appeal to you? What was it that rubbed against you? In terms of thinking of your wildest dreams come true, it's interesting that you went to that mental exercise. What was it about it that you found wouldn't work?
Right. I think it's so succinct and simple. I would be spending all my time with other people's music.
Mm-hmm.
Every hour would be devoted to the study of great music, nonetheless, but of other people's music. Mm-hmm. So my creativity would be restricted into, let's see, thoughtful programming or my unique creative interpretation of a Beethoven symphony. And that just wasn't good enough for me as a person who was a songwriter and a singer and a creator. I mean, I knew by the time I was 24 that was my real gift.
Yeah.
to create things myself. So it was interesting, I made that decision and then the calls started coming, and then I had to tell people, no, I'm sorry. I know I was really interested just 6 months ago, but I'm not anymore.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. That takes incredible courage. What was your backup or what was your plan? I mean, musicians, when the gigs aren't there, you're pining for them, and when they're there, there's almost an attitude of take anything, just do anything. What gave you the courage to say no?
Yeah, I because I just wanted so badly, to be creative. And I also had this feeling. I was so young and I had my whole life in front of me. And I just thought, I guess I started viewing conducting truly as a backup, as something I would do later in life if I needed to. But right now I'm going to write songs. I'm going to be a pop star. I'm going to, produce albums. And Hugh, I don't know. I don't know what my plan was. I just know that I somehow reacted very strongly against that sort of that sort of classical path. Maybe it was the intensity of Curtis, just that had built up and just kind of I was having some backlash against it. But it's one thing is for sure that I understand the decision now, of course, as the way my life has panned out. However, I do look back and I say, my gosh, the New York Youth Symphony called me. I mean, that's the gig I wanted badly for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I just said I wasn't interested. I mean,
wow. So, it's interesting because in the classical music world, there are probably much more established career tracks. Now, the pop world is far more difficult because there's far more people and it's far more nebulous to get a break, to get things happening. So what were you doing to get ahead on your pop track? What were some of the things that you worked on? You said you were writing songs, but what were the other career things that you were working on to try to make that happen?
Right. I mean, as far as identifying a real, a reasonable and sort of logical career path during those couple years that were about to unfold. It's hard to find anything. I mean, I was just doing anything. I was playing in cover bands. I was, writing my own songs. I was doing songwriting competitions. I had my own acts, and we would play at clubs. We would play at bars. I was recording. This is the time when I went and did American Idol. And, and again, there's a wonderful rejection that ended up being a just incredibly clarifying gift. But it was a disappointment nonetheless. So those are kind of two, it was a scramble, and the whole time I'm thinking to myself, was this the right thing? More than that, honestly, I don't remember really kind of regretting much, but I remember missing classical music. That was the biggest thing. Luckily, during those years, I kept connected to classical music through my work with Time for Three.
So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your relationship with Time for Three. They actually were on the show several episodes ago, and I sense that there was a lot of kindred spirits between you and members like Nick Kendall, who was this incredible classical violinist, but he also had this passion for hip-hop and jazz and improvisation. And Renan Meyer, who was also a jazzer on the side, in addition to being a phenomenal classical bassist. And Zach DePew, who came from a bluegrass background. And amazing that you found each other. Just tell us a little bit about your relationship with them and how that blossomed into some of the amazing arrangements that you've created for them in the intervening years.
Absolutely, yeah. Three of my closest friends to this day, and gosh, this could be a whole kind of talk into itself because it's such a fun story, and it's such a fun journey that continues to this day. But Renaud and I were classmates at Curtis, graduated at the same time. Zach was the concert master for my Curtis audition, and I'll never forget him being there. And Nick and I lived together in Philadelphia for several years.
How about that?
So I remember the first quote unquote Curtis party I went to was at Renan's house. And I remember being upstairs listening. We were in just some room listening to a Tchaikovsky symphony. And I didn't know Nick because I wasn't in school with him, but I was sitting there. I had gone to a state university. I mean, I had been to college parties before. You don't really hear Tchaikovsky at a college party. And, here are Nick and I just free to just appreciate. It was the end of the first movement. It's amazing, movement. It's such a pop device, actually, Tchaikovsky uses at that point. But that was the beginning of my connection with Nick. And later we'd lived together and just become wonderful friends. But over the years, we all realized we had this connection, and Time for Three, I think, first asked me to write for them 2005, I want to say. So that's a conversation that's now more than 10 years old. And so through those years when I was just doing the pop thing, I was still writing for them. And in fact, I started to write for them quite a bit, but I was writing these sort of classical pop mashup type arrangements, these virtuosic treatments of popular music. And that is a really important kind of turning point. And that's an important beginning, because that track kind of is what led me to these full-scale classical mashups like the Bartók Bjork. I mean, that was the beginning of that.
Incredible. So as we mentioned at the beginning, I had a chance to get exposed to your incredible symphonic treatments. And all I could say is that, wow, it works so brilliantly. Taking, for example, Beethoven and Coldplay, and creating an oratorio with the Eroica Symphony, and combined perfectly with elements from a whole variety of Coldplay songs, and doing the same thing with Brahms and with Bartók and Copland. What inspired you? What was the first symphonic mashup? And did you do this on your own, or were you actually commissioned? In other words, how did that project begin? The beginning of the mashups is really with Time for Three and the Indianapolis Symphony. And
Time for Three had just been, given the artist in residence with the ISO. And the ISO had a series called the Happy Hour series, and the goal of which was to engage with young people and to bring a new audience into the concert hall. So the ISO said to Time for Three, we think you'd be perfect for this. Would you want to take over and assume responsibility of this series? And they said, well, let's think about it. And they went to me and said, Steve, we might have an opportunity for you here to sort of come on board as the conductor and, more importantly, the arranger of this series with us. And I thought about it and thought, wow, this might be an amazing way to sort of marry my two worlds. This would be the opportunity to do sort of kind of what I've been dreaming of from the very beginning with conducting, to present my own concerts with content, with kind of updated, evolved content that reflected my attitudes and my, sort of aesthetics. So Time for Three was able to convince the ISO to take me on, even though I hadn't conducted an orchestra in 3 years. And really, Reading is the only gig I'd had at that point. But they were able to convince them, and that was the beginning. So here we were. We had 4 concerts per year. We were writing, or I was writing and arranging all the music.
Oh my goodness!
We were planning them to. Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a crucial period for me from a development of technique standpoint. Not only as a writer, arranger, and orchestrator, but as a conductor on the podium. So the way the mashup, the full-scale pieces evolved was I needed something to do when Time for Three wasn't with me. You see, they played out of the 4 per year. They did 2 of them, but then 2 of them were just myself and the orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And what I really was seeking to do was, you see, Time for Three, they're rock stars. You know those guys.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
And they were blowing audiences away. But when they went away, I was thinking to myself, well, I want to throw as good concerts as they do. I mean, I don't want the audience to feel like, oh, we're only going to attend this series when Time for Three is there. I want to be the rock star as well. So that was the beginning of this idea. And I'd been writing these mashups for Time for Three, but I thought, well, this is an amazing opportunity to bring vocalists into the mix. And I knew as a songwriter and producer how crucial, the place of vocalists you can be when you're reaching new audiences. So yeah, it was 2011, and I just kind of went to the ISO and Time for Three, and I said, hey, I've got an idea to sort of do a bigger mashup, really kind of expand what we've been doing. And would you let me do that, basically? And it was with Copeland and Bon Iver. And I said, it's going to be about 45 minutes. Do you think our audience, I said, I think the audience can sit through it, but do you? And they said, go for it.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of it.
Wow.
Don't you cherish me to sleep? Never keep your eyes clean. Only for the pops and clicks. I was only for the father's grave. Don't you cherish me to sleep?
And then you have Brahms v. Radiohead. I mean, it's just incredible. So tell us a little bit about the first one. How did it go? How did the audience react?
It was so fantastic. I mean, I just think the audience was not, by that point we'd been performing there for a couple years, and the audience knew to expect something different at every concert. But I just think they really appreciated that this was a new sort of endeavor, that this was a very contemporary way of experiencing two types of music that necessarily shouldn't be combined, but yet here they were, kind of being married in an intelligent, in a beautiful way. And let's keep in mind, they're hearing Copland's Appalachian Spring, for most of them probably for the first time.
Yeah.
So it was received very well, from my standpoint certainly as a conductor, but also as an arranger. I knew instantly, okay, there's a lot of things I can do better here, but it went well enough that they, granted me the permission to do another one a couple concerts later. And that was the Brahms versus Radiohead. And that was the one I think that really kind of blew this whole thing open, because that one was a very big success.
Did those concerts help the orchestra? Was the orchestra able to grow their audience? Were they able to accomplish their mission of getting more young people to come to these concerts? Because it sounds like this is the perfect vehicle to do that with.
Well, I think the only reason I would have ever been given the artistic license to do this is because to that point we already were quite successful in reaching a new audience. I mean, those concerts, listen, the first concert I did with the Indianapolis Symphony was in let's see, 2010, January of 2010, and Time for Three actually wasn't on. They weren't on that concert, so it was just the orchestra and I, and there were 1,200 people there.
Wow.
So it was that was I did a tiny little mashup of Beethoven Coldplay, just a very superficial, just here's one, then it segues into the other. Nothing like what it would eventually be. But the concept alone really resonated with people, and the ISO was smart in the way they marketed it. They really pushed that message out there of like Beethoven and Coldplay being combined. And that's kind of become the theme of those happy hour concerts. There's always some sort of odd pairing like that.
So cool. Now, just out of curiosity, were there any licensing issues in terms of using the music of these more famous, in terms of today's audiences, these well-established pop artists? Were there any specific licensing issues you had to deal with to get this music out?
No, not to present them live like that. We were really fortunate with the Indianapolis Symphony because they're an orchestra that does everything really well, and they have a huge pops wing because of Jack Everly and Ty Johnson, who are great friends and mentors of mine. They kind of invented a lot of the elements of modern day symphonic pops, but as a result, they deal with other people's music all the time. And so the system was very much in place, that's all cleared. But frankly, if you're just, as long as the performance venue is paying their BMI and their ASCAP fees, you're cleared to do quote unquote arrangements of, whatever music you like. Now, granted, I was taking the arrangement thing, pretty far with combining with the classical music, but, it was okay.
And I have to say, these arrangements are incredible. I can't think of anyone that has your skill level, your depth of classical knowledge, but also your depth of pop knowledge to be able to weave these two different styles so expertly and so convincingly. It's incredible what you've done. I can't wait for more people to hear these amazing arrangements.
Well, Hugh, you're so kind to say that. And you're, given your background, I think that you're such you get both sides and you appreciate both sides, and you just, you're an appreciator of art in general and kind of new thinking in general. So I think you would definitely be kind of the perfect person, to sort of get this. I wish I could say that everybody, kind of unanimously feels that way, but you've got a healthy amount of people, and oftentimes they're the ones that are sitting down in the orchestra that kind of think to themselves, well, what's wrong with Beethoven in the first place?
Yeah, the kind of the old guard, which kind of thinks, well, leave the classical music alone. They're the purists, so to speak, and they do represent a significant portion of the classical music community. That it makes it very hard to introduce truly new and innovative ideas like this.
Very much so. But, I have to say, I've just been so lucky because, firstly, because of that opportunity with the Indianapolis Symphony and that they took the chance sort of on me, and they took the chance on my content or my ideas, together with Time for Three. And then as time goes on, I really have had incredible assistance from some key either members of administration or board members at different institutions that just, they believed so strongly in what I was doing that, they just wouldn't take no for an answer. And without those huge advocates, you read about the careers of these composers and people like Tchaikovsky or Mozart or Beethoven, and you read about their sort of benefactors and the people that helped them and helped kind of develop and nurture their talent and gave them opportunities. I've had people like that. I honestly have, Hugh, and they're tremendous friends of mine, but they believed so much. I cannot believe what some individuals have done, to help me. It makes me just feel, overwhelmingly humbled and thankful. It just things would not be where they are today. They just would not without some of these key individuals.
Now, you've gone on to produce and conduct your arrangements with the orchestras in Colorado. You've been appointed the director of the artistic director of the new Fuse series with the Pittsburgh Symphony. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about some of your projects with these other orchestras.
Right. Well, they all sort of have the Indianapolis series as their template. And, I guess the difference would be that I kind of have I'm the sole kind of creative director, whereas at Indianapolis, it was shared with Time for Three. So yeah, the current position is with Pittsburgh, and it's just the same. It's really the same concept. We do an earlier concert. We have a party beforehand with a DJ or with live music and cocktails and a great fun contemporary attitude. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's an attitude, isn't it? I mean, it's a contemporary attitude. I think your wording is spot on. It's interesting because in the classical music world, we do have an intimidating attitude. I know friends of mine who have never been to a classical music concert. They worry, well, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to wear? Something? Is there a costume that I have to wear? A certain dress code? I mean, and there's all these behavioral things that classical musicians take for granted: when to clap, when to react, when to be quiet. That can be very stifling. And this contemporary attitude is, I think, a necessary adjustment to keep our art relevant to today's audiences. That's part of what gets me so excited about what you are spearheading in your productions. It's so thrilling.
You're completely right. And, I think that really the next step is to just continue to win favor and continue the conversation with the musicians themselves. Because remember, when I'm presenting these concerts, it's 3 or 4 singers and rappers, but there's a 75-piece orchestra up there, and I'm lucky that places like Indianapolis, Colorado, Pittsburgh have taken the chance on me, and with every performance, I will say the musicians, they start to get it more and more. I mean, at first, I think it's a very difficult concept for them to understand, to appreciate, or really to tolerate, because you're taking their Bible, and you're sort of editing it.
Yeah, and that's another thing you're hitting right on the head. There's almost, I don't want to be sacrilegious here, but there's almost a religious fervor to the fidelity of the musical text. It's almost like scripture, as you say. And musicians have the silliest arguments about whether this dot should be a dot or a dash or a line, or this edition, that edition, this. And what strikes me sometimes is the average person who's never heard this music. Do you think they really care?
Right.
And yet musicians will just argue so fervently about which is the correct way to read or interpret such and such a note or dot or squiggle on a composer's score.
I think I agree with that fully. It's such an amazing point. But I think, an even more poignant and maybe relevant question is, how much do you think the composer really cared? And I know people are going to, be aghast at that, but I mean, yes, dots and dashes and lines, they are important, but I'm a composer, and I understand that sometimes sometimes you feel very strongly about a slur or a line or a dash, I understand that, but sometimes you don't. And sometimes things get changed and adjusted, and you do your first performance and you say, my gosh, I thought those would sound good, short, and that needs to be longer. So what I'm really getting at here is, if a musician has never been a creator, then they don't necessarily understand that, and that's I think what is so unique, and oftentimes what makes classical music so difficult, because you've got creators sort of working with quote unquote non-creators. And I know that sounds awful, but think about the pop music world. That's never really the case. I mean, even Taylor Swift's backing band, who are probably the best studio musicians on the planet, all those guys or those girls, they've all written songs themselves. They all got into music to be a songwriter and to be an artist. So I think this is the big difference in just the attitude between classical and popular. I think, you've got a body of musicians that they haven't been exercising their own creative potentials. And that is, dare I say, destructive in some ways.
it's certainly inhibiting, isn't
constructive.
it? It's certainly inhibiting. You're limited to arguing about interpretive ideas. Whose interpretation is quote unquote better than somebody else's, as opposed to who actually has an original idea, something new, truly new, to bring into the world, a new perspective, a new creation. If you don't mind, I'd like to circle back a little bit to your pop side. I was watching one of your gorgeous music videos, Highway Eyes, and this is a video where we get to see you play, sing. It's gorgeously produced.
Like a circus stuntman tied, roping, or a cardinal mid-flight, floating, highway eyes made unfree, bound to all they see. So the face cannonballist fires at the watchful ballistics, by matches struck in such ways, forehead burned by each gaze, as if it was a machine already.
Tell us a little bit about what's happening in your own original music. These mashups are great, and they take incredible creativity, but in a sense, they're still other people's music. And you are a creator. You still have your own songs. What's happening on your own original creative front, either in the pop or classical or any other spheres?
Right, definitely. Well, so this is a particularly exciting time for me on that side of things, because the second stereo hideout, that's kind of the name, the moniker for my own original music. The second full album is really close to being done. We start mixing today, actually.
Wow,
and,
cool.
We'll hopefully the song will be all mixed by the new year. But the idea, Hugh, is that I would love for this stuff to all meet in the middle, so to speak. So you have on one side the classical mashups and these kind of these newly redefined classical concerts that I'm giving, and then on the other side you've got the quote unquote pop music, but the pop music reflects the same attitudes and the same desire to create a hybrid between classical and popular. So this album that I'm working on it's really a hip hop album. A lot of pop in there, but it's hip hop in a sense that I took classical music and I sampled it, and that's really kind of the creative gesture that is at the crux of any hip hop track. You you take music from another genre, from another recording, you splice that little 2 or 3 seconds, and then you create a track around that, little kernel. So I did this with Tchaikovsky and, Benjamin Britten and, Bach and Beethoven and Debussy, and then wrote songs around those samples. And at times I would use an extended period of classical music, 30, 40 seconds, and write songs on top of, Verdi or whoever it was. So, and then bring in rappers, bring in singers, and create this really modern soundscape. But again, at the root of it, the musical basis is classical music. So that's about done. And I don't know the goal. I really have this. I don't know quite how it looks yet, but I have this goal in mind that they meet in the middle. And so perhaps you've got a classical presentation at 8:00, and then at 10:00 we move over to the club, and I've got the band and the singers and the rappers and some classical musicians, and it's a whole different experience, but yet the same, because it's these two types of music commingling.
It's fascinating because in some of the descriptions of your mashups, you take great pains to point out that no matter the musical era, whether it's in classical, romantic, or modern pop times, all these musicians were wrestling with the same human issues of struggle, loss, pain, fear, love, hope. They're universal issues, what we all experience. And your music gives us such a wide kaleidoscope to re-examine those same issues, regardless of the genre. And you bring these things so incredibly well together. And I would have to say, with some of your more popular original tracks that I've been listening to, I can't wait for folks to hear, for my audience to hear it, because there's a tremendous depth to your pop writing that I just don't hear in a lot of commercial recordings. I mean, you bring a classical sense to pop, which is so sophisticated and so rich, and yet so accessible. It's just you're onto something really remarkable, Steve.
Well, thank you so much. It's really difficult, and I'm sure you can relate to this. When you get to such a kind of developed place in one thing. So let's take classical music. When anybody that attended a place like Curtis or Juilliard or any of these places, and when you've been so immersed in classical music, you understand the technique and you can execute it yourself. To then turn the corner and try to understand a different genre is very difficult, because you're wired a certain way at that point, and you have to unwire yourself. You have to kind of reset. You have to reprogram, and it's just tough.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this is taking so long for me. And that's why it continues to be such a fascinating journey, because I realize the things that I don't know so often. And I look at myself, a few years back, and I said, my gosh, that's what I thought it should be. That was my solution at that point. That's so contrary to what it should have been. And it's, I think it's because a lot of this, we just get hardwired in this way. And I don't know, that I think is the journey. It's trying to figure out, how do these things work together? And then, how can I reach the most amount of people and kind of touch their lives with this music and give them an experience with this wide array of emotions, but in a way that they're going to understand and be able to digest, because you can't just, unfortunately these days, you can't just throw Mahler at somebody. I wish we could, I know they can get Mahler, but it takes, you have to be crafty, with your presentation and your technique to get them there.
And it's also, if I may reflect, it's also your own personal journey. It's been a personal journey to have the courage to pursue your own voice rather than simply follow in the footsteps of somebody great. And finding your own creative convictions and not being afraid to follow that. That takes tremendous courage. And wow, Steve, I'm hats off to you. It's incredible.
I mean, just as something to say on that, I mean, I think maybe that's the biggest underlying reason, or one of the biggest motivators behind putting on these mashup shows, because it's if we go all the way back to those years at Curtis when I was hiding the fact that I was listening to Radiohead at night and writing songs to try to be the next Radiohead at night, presenting the Brahms versus Radiohead with a symphony orchestra into a hall of a few thousand people is sort of me kind of breaking out and saying, I don't want to hide this anymore. Mm-hmm. And I know that people feel the same way. I feel it, and I talk to people after these concerts that say, thank you for putting these things together. Like, thank you for understanding that we don't have to choose one or the other, that they're both great. And thank you for sort of fighting against that sort of, compartmentalization and that sort of, judgment and classification that we want to do so often.
Steve, I'm going to have you back on the show when your new album comes out so we can start focusing on the other side of you. I mean, there's so many aspects of you. I feel like we can have you back over and over again when you have your next projects crystallize. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk and to share so earnestly your life and artistic journey with us.
Well, I would love, this has been, I feel like we're only scratching the surface here because we were going to talk about sort of the entrepreneurial aspect and all the things you've been doing. So we've got to do a part 2.
Absolutely.
And of course I would love to talk about, the album when it's done, and that would be soon. So I really hope you'll consider having another chat. That'd be awesome. This has been great.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for being on, Steve, and we'll get you scheduled for the next part 2 episode as soon as possible. Okay?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hugh.
For links to Stephen's websites, as well as videos of his symphonic mashups and original songs, visit the show notes at amusicallife.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter to get the latest updates on future episodes. You can also subscribe to A Musical Life through iTunes or with your favorite podcast playing app, and get new episodes automatically downloaded onto your smartphone, tablet, or computer. If you enjoy these stories about making music and the things that move our souls, please tell a friend about this show and consider posting a short review on iTunes at amusicallife.com/review. Thank you for your support. Until next time, I'm Hugh Sung, and I wish you a musical life.